Hey everyone, welcome back. So in today's video, we are going to uh, discuss about sampling in statistics. Okay, so what is sampling and what are the various sampling techniques we have? Okay, so let's go into the video to see that. So before seeing what is sampling, let's talk about population and sample. So what is sample and what is population? So when we say population, it refers to the entire group, right? So let's say if we wanted to collect some data for any research, right? The target people, right? The entire element of the target group is called as the population, right? Each and every element from that group is called as population, right? But when I say sample, you can say it as subset of population, where I'll be selecting few elements from the population, right? So the process of selecting few elements from the population is called as sampling. Okay. So when we wanted to work with the sample data, okay, basically why do we do sampling? So when we are not accessible to population data or when we are not able to handle large data, we take a few samples from them and samples from the population, and we will try to draw some conclusion, okay, uh, on the population data, right? So just to estimate the characteristic of the population, we take samples, right? And we work on the sample data, right? So sampling is nothing but it is a process of selecting few samples from the population, right? Now, let's see what are the techniques we have in sampling. So we have simple random sampling. We have systematic sampling. We have stratified random sampling. So here we are discussing only about the probability sampling. Okay, there are many sampling techniques. Okay, so we will see few methods here. Okay, so we have cluster random sampling. So we are going to discuss about the commonly used sampling techniques. So these are the sampling techniques we have. Okay, so let's discuss one by one. So what is simple random sampling? So when we say simple random sampling, here each and every element of the population has the equal chance to get selected. Okay, so when we say simple random sampling, we are going to randomly select few samples. Okay, so here each and every element, right? Every element has equal chance to be selected. Okay. And now when I say systematic random sampling, okay, or systematic sampling, here we are going to follow some systematic way to select the samples. Okay. Let's say, for example, if I say I want to select every alternate person in the population. So let's say you have the population. Okay. And I'm just going to take every alternate element. Some systematic way or systematic approach I'll have to select the samples here. It can be any way. Okay. So you can say every fourth element or every 10th element I'm going to take. So you will have some systematic approach to select the samples. Okay. So this is called as systematic sampling. Okay. Systematic random sampling. Okay. So every kth element. Okay, is selected as the sample. Okay, so this is how the systematic random sampling works. And now stratified random sampling. Okay, so when we say stratified random sampling, we are going to divide the entire population into groups. So let's assume this is our population, and I'm going to make groups of this population. Okay, so each group is called as strata, and altogether it is called as strata. So now, if I wanted to select the samples from each group, randomly I will select few samples. So let's say from this group, I'm going to pick 5 samples. Randomly I'm selecting. And again from the second group, I pick 5 samples. And again from third group, I'm picking few samples. Okay. So randomly I'm selecting these samples from each group. So first I'll divide the entire population into groups, and in each group I'm going to randomly select few samples. So this is called as stratified random sampling. Okay. Now the last one, the cluster random sampling. So in cluster random sampling, again you will divide the entire population into groups, or we also call it as clusters. Okay. Now, instead of selecting samples from every group, I'm going to randomly select one cluster here or one group here. Okay. So let's say if I select this cluster and this cluster, now who will be the elements? So all the elements of this cluster and all the elements of this cluster is going to be my samples. Okay. So here I'm dividing the entire population into groups, which we also call it as clusters, right? And I'm going to select few samples from, I'm going to select randomly some cluster here for the samples. Okay. So when I take any cluster, the entire elements, all the elements of this cluster and all the elements of this cluster is going to be my samples. Okay, so what is the difference between stratified random sampling and cluster random sampling? In stratified random sampling, you are dividing the entire population into groups, and from each group you are going to select few samples. But in case of cluster random sampling, you divide the entire population into groups, but you select some of the groups itself, right? So whichever groups are selected, in that all the elements are going to be my samples. Okay, so these are the common sampling techniques we have, okay, which are basically used, okay, which are frequently used. So we have simple random sampling. Here randomly we are going to select some samples, so every element has equal chance to be selected. And systematic sampling, you will have some systematic approach to select the samples. And stratified random sampling, we divide the entire population into groups, and from each group I'm going to pick few samples. But in cluster random sampling, where I divide the entire population into groups, but here Not from all the cluster I'm going to take. I'm going to select randomly some of the clusters, and all the elements of the selected cluster will be my samples. Okay, so basically sampling is nothing but it is a process of selecting the samples from the population. Okay, so for that we have various techniques, okay, as we discussed here. Okay, so any of these techniques are used for taking samples from the population. Okay, thank you.